Trust me, you won't forget this one. 3-year-old girl. Billionaire. A stormy night. And 4 words that stopped everything. She ran onto that rain-soaked tarmac in her tiny red dress, soaking wet, arms stretched wide, tears streaming down her little face, and she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Don't get on that plane." The entire airport went silent. Security guards froze. Flight crew turned around. And a 36-year-old billionaire, a man who had never let anyone tell him what to do in his entire life, stopped dead in his tracks. She was 3 years old. She was a maid's daughter. And somehow, she knew something that nobody else did. What happened next shut down the entire airport. And when the truth finally came out, not a single person in that building could hold back their tears. Welcome back, friends. If you are new here, I am so glad you found this channel because this is the kind of place where real human stories live. Stories that make you feel something deep in your chest. Stories that remind you that life is more mysterious, more beautiful, and more connected than we ever realize. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I read every single one, and honestly, seeing how many different corners of the world are gathered here together always gives me chills. Now settle in because what you are about to hear is one of the most emotionally powerful, jaw-dropping, and deeply heartwarming stories I have ever told on this channel. It involves a billionaire at the peak of his power, a young mother working the hardest job of her life, and a tiny little girl in a red dress who somehow, in ways that science still cannot fully explain, saved a life that night. No spoilers, no shortcuts, just buckle up, because this story earns every single second of your time. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the heaviest truth, and on this particular night, nobody understood that yet. The evening of October 14th started like any other Thursday at Hargrove International Airport just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of airport that hums with quiet efficiency. Private terminals gleaming under warm lighting, suited staff moving with practiced grace, and the faint smell of jet fuel mixing with expensive cologne drifting through the VIP corridors. A storm had been rolling in from the coast since early afternoon. The kind of storm that makes the sky turn that unsettling shade of greenish-gray. Weather crews had been watching it carefully, but as of 6 o'clock that evening, the private aviation wing was still operating. Delays were possible. Cancellations had not yet been called. And that suited Marcus Hargrove just fine. Marcus Hargrove was 36 years old. To most people in Charlotte, that name meant money. Old money, new money, and everything in between. His grandfather had built a regional logistics company in the 1960s. His father had turned it into a national operation. And Marcus, sharp, driven, relentless, had transformed it into a global empire worth somewhere north of $4 billion. He was tall, dark-haired, handsome in the way that powerful men sometimes are, not because of softness but because of certainty. There was something about the way Marcus walked that told you immediately he was a man who had never really been told no. Not by boardrooms, not by banks, and definitely not by weather. That evening, Marcus was scheduled to fly to New York for a critical merger meeting the following morning. The deal on the table was the biggest acquisition his company had ever attempted, a European shipping conglomerate worth nearly $2 billion. 3 years of negotiations were coming to a close. Missing that meeting was simply not an option. His personal assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, had already confirmed the flight plan twice. His private jet, a Gulfstream G700, was fueled, staffed, and ready on the tarmac. Departure was set for 7:15 p.m. Marcus arrived at the private terminal at 6:40 with a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, already mid-conversation with his legal team about final contract language. He barely looked up as the staff greeted him. He handed off his coat to a waiting attendant and moved through the terminal with the automatic confidence of a man who had done this 100 times. He had done this 100 times. The private terminal at Hargrove, yes, his family's name was on the building, a detail Marcus never talked about because he found it embarrassing. Had a small attached facility wing where airport staff and service workers operated out of. Cleaning crews, catering staff, maintenance workers. People who kept the whole glittering machine running while staying mostly invisible to the people they served. Among those workers that evening was a woman named Dolores Simmons. Dolores was 27 years old. She had been working as an airport cleaning supervisor for 3 years, ever since moving to Charlotte from a small town in rural Georgia after her mother passed away and left her with nothing but a packed bag, a few $100s, and a 3-year-old daughter named Lily. Lily. That was the name that would matter tonight. That was the name that would echo through that terminal, through that tarmac, through that entire building, long after the storm passed and the truth finally came out. Lily Simmons was 3 years old. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her late grandmother's gap-toothed smile. She wore her hair in 2 small puffs on either side of her head, and that evening she was dressed in her favorite outfit, a bright red corduroy dress with little white buttons down the front that Dolores had found at a thrift store and hand-washed until it looked almost brand new. Dolores had been forced to bring Lily to work that night because her babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. Was not allowed, technically. But her supervisor, a kind older man named Gerald, had quietly told her to keep Lily in the staff break room and nobody would make a fuss. Dolores had set Lily up with a juice box, a coloring book, and a firm instruction. You stay right here in this chair, baby. Mama will check on you every little bit. Do not go anywhere. You hear me? Lily had nodded with complete seriousness. She understood. She was, as Dolores always said, an old soul in a tiny body. For while everything was fine, Dolores moved through her shift. Gerald covered for her. Lily sat coloring in the break room, working very seriously on a picture of what appeared to be a house with an extremely large sun above it. But somewhere around 6:55 p.m. something changed. Later, Dolores would not be able to explain exactly how it happened. She had stepped out of the break room for less than 4 minutes to handle a spill near Gate C. When she came back, the break room was empty. The juice box was on the table. The coloring book was open. And Lily was gone. Dolores felt her heart drop straight to the floor. She called Lily's name. No answer. She checked the hallway. Me. He checked the bathroom. Nothing. And then someone, one of the catering crew members, came running down the corridor with wide eyes and said 3 words that made Dolores's blood run cold. She went outside. What would you do in that moment? If your 3-year-old had just wandered onto an active airport tarmac in the middle of a storm? Dolores didn't stop to answer that question. She just ran. Nobody on that tarmac had any idea that the most important thing that would happen that night was being driven entirely by a 3-year-old in a red dress who couldn't even tie her own shoes yet. By the time Dolores burst through the heavy side door that led out to the tarmac area, rain was coming down in thick, cold sheets. The wind had picked up sharply in the last hour. The storm that had been threatening all day had officially arrived. The tarmac lights cast everything in that wet orange-yellow glow, slick black pavement reflecting the light like a dark mirror, the shapes of aircraft hulking in the distance, the sound of engines warming up somewhere across the field. And there, about 40 yards ahead of her, was a tiny red dot. Lily. She was moving. Not running exactly. Toddling fast, with that determined wide-legged stride that very small children have when they are absolutely convinced they are going somewhere important. Her little arms were pumping at her sides. Her hair puffs had flattened in the rain. Her red dress was already soaked. Dolores screamed her name and ran. But Lily didn't stop. On the other side of that tarmac, Marcus Hargrove was walking toward his jet. His umbrella had already been taken by an assistant. He had his suit jacket on. The rain was an inconvenience. He had been through worse. The flight crew was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, ready to welcome him aboard. Priya was already on the phone confirming his arrival to the New York team. 30 more steps and he would be at the base of those stairs. 20 more steps. 15. And then he heard it. It did not come through a speaker. It did not come from a security guard or an assistant or a crew member. Came from somewhere low. Somewhere small. Somewhere that made absolutely no logical sense on an active airport tarmac on a stormy Thursday night in Charlotte, North Carolina. Tiny voice. High and clear and absolutely certain. Cutting right through the sound of the rain and the wind and the distant engine noise like a bell. Don't get on that plane. Marcus stopped. He turned. And standing there in the rain, soaking wet, arms stretched out wide to her sides like she was physically trying to block the entire world, was a little girl in a red dress. 3 years old. Maybe 4. Teeny. Absolutely drenched. With the most earnest, terrified, desperate expression on her face that Marcus had ever seen on any human being in his entire life. He stood completely still. His flight crew exchanged confused glances. Priya lowered her phone. 2 security guards who had been escorting Marcus turned and stared. The little girl did not move. She just stood there in the rain with her arms out, breathing hard, staring straight at Marcus with those wide brown eyes. And then she said it again. Quieter this time. More personal. Like she was talking directly to him and only him. Please. Don't get on that plane. Marcus Hargrove had been in boardrooms with people trying to manipulate him. He had been in courtrooms with skilled lawyers trying to intimidate him. He had sat across tables from some of the shrewdest, most calculating minds in American business. None of them had ever affected him the way this child just did in this moment. He didn't know why. He couldn't explain it. But something in his chest, something animal and ancient and completely bypassing rational thought, made his feet stay exactly where they were. Priya appeared at his shoulder. Marcus, we need to board. Departure window is closing. He didn't answer her. He was still looking at the little girl. By now, Dolores had reached Lily. She swept her daughter up off the wet pavement, gasping for breath, clutching her tight. Baby, what are you doing out here? What are you? I told you to stay, Lily, I told you. Lily was not crying. She was not scared the way a lost child is scared. She pressed her small hands against her mother's face and said, with extraordinary calm for a 3-year-old, Mama, the bad thing is on the plane. He can't go. Dolores felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. She looked up, and she realized for the first time that the man standing 20 feet away in the expensive suit, the man her daughter had just stopped in the middle of a tarmac, was looking directly at them. She also realized, with a deep wave of panic, who he was. She had seen his photograph a dozen times. In the terminal. On the building plaques. On the framed photo in the lobby of the private wing that showed 3 generations of the Hargrove family standing in front of the very building she cleaned every night. That was Marcus Hargrove. And her soaking wet 3-year-old had just run onto his tarmac and told him not to board his plane. Dolores opened her mouth. She didn't even know what to say. An apology felt completely inadequate. An explanation felt impossible. She just stood there holding Lily in the rain, and said the only thing she could manage. "Sir, I am so sorry. I don't know what she must have. I am so sorry." But Marcus wasn't listening to the apology. He was watching Lily. Because Lily was still looking at him. Certain. Like she was waiting for him to make the right decision. And Marcus Hargrove, the man who had never let anyone tell him what to do, turned to his head of security and said 4 words that nobody in his team had ever heard him say before. "Delay the flight. Now." Have you ever had a feeling, a gut feeling, a sudden inexplicable knowing, that made you change course completely? That made you stop doing something you were absolutely certain you were about to do. Because that is exactly what happened to Marcus Hargrove on that tarmac. And within the next hour, he would understand exactly why. What the security team found when they finally opened that maintenance panel changed everything. And nothing about that night would ever feel ordinary again. The call went out at 7:03 p.m. Marcus's head of personal security, a former federal agent named Robert Shields, had worked for the Hargrove family for 9 years. He had seen a lot of things in that time. He was not a man who rattled easily. But when Marcus told him to delay the flight and have the aircraft checked, not a standard pre-flight check, a full sweep, Robert didn't ask questions. He knew that tone. That was the tone Marcus used when something in his gut was speaking louder than his brain. Robert made 3 calls in 60 seconds. 1 to the flight crew. 1 to airport operations. 1 to the private aviation maintenance team. Full sweep. Everything. Inside the terminal, Marcus had been escorted back and out of the rain. Dolores had been brought in as well, Lily still wrapped in her arms, both of them wrapped in emergency thermal blankets by a staff member who had found them in the corridor. Lily seemed completely unbothered by all of it. She sat on the bench with her blanket around her shoulders, calmly examining the zipper on her mother's jacket. Dolores, on the other hand, looked like she might be sick. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice trembling. "I am truly sorry about this. I should never have brought her to work. She was supposed to stay in the break room. I don't know how she got out. I don't know how she knew where to go or why she said. I don't understand what happened." Marcus sat down across from them. Not in an intimidating way. He sat like someone who had just had the certainty knocked out of him and was trying to find his footing again. "How old is she?" he asked. 3, Dolores said. "She just turned 3 in August." Marcus looked at Lily. "Hey," he said quietly. "What's your name?" Lily looked up from the zipper. "Lily." "Lily," he said. "That's a beautiful name." She nodded gravely, as if this was important information she was confirming. "Lily," he said carefully. "What did you mean when you said there was a bad thing on the plane?" Lily thought about this for a moment. She scrunched up her face in that very particular way small children do when they are reaching for language that is bigger than what they have available. "It was broken," she said finally. "The inside. The broken part was on fire." Dolores shook her head slowly, closing her eyes. "Marcus, Mr. Hargrove, I am so sorry. She does this sometimes. She says things that don't make sense. She probably heard someone talking about the storm or on fire," Marcus said, still looking at Lily. Lily nodded. Very serious. "In my dream. Fell down. And you were sad." The room was very quiet. And then Robert Shields appeared in the doorway. The expression on Robert's face was something Marcus had never seen before in 9 years of working together. The color had drained from it completely. "Marcus," Robert said. "You need to come see this." Marcus stood immediately. He looked at Dolores. "Stay here, please," and followed Robert out into the corridor. Robert led him quickly through the back passage that connected the terminal to the ground crew operations area. They stepped out under a covered section of the tarmac where the Gulfstream was parked. The maintenance team was clustered around the aircraft. Two of them were crouched near the rear section of the fuselage. Portable light had been set up. Robert stopped Marcus a few feet away and spoke in a low, controlled voice. The senior maintenance tech found it on the second inspection pass. There is a fracture in the fuel line coupler on the starboard side. It is not a new fracture. The metal shows stress fatigue, which means it has been developing for some time. The pre-flight check this afternoon missed it. The crack was small and positioned in a way that didn't read clearly on the standard visual inspection. Marcus stared at him. What does that mean in plain language, Robert? Robert met his eyes. At altitude, particularly in a high-pressure weather event like the storm we're currently flying into, that coupler could have failed. Fuel line failure at altitude in a storm at night. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus turned and looked at his aircraft. The plane he had flown 100 times. The plane he would have boarded 20 minutes ago if not for a 3-year-old girl in a red dress standing in the rain with her arms out. The maintenance chief, a woman named Sandra, walked over with a tablet showing imaging of the crack. Mr. Hargrove, I want to be honest with you. We cannot say with complete certainty that this would have caused catastrophic failure. But we cannot say with any certainty that it would not have. Given the storm conditions tonight, the pressure differential at cruising altitude. She shook her head. I would not have wanted to find out the hard way. Marcus stood in the rain under that canopy for a long moment. He thought about the meeting in New York. The merger. 3 years of work. And then he thought about a little girl standing on a wet tarmac with her arms stretched out wide and a look of absolute certainty on her face that no 3-year-old should ever be able to manufacture. The broken part was on fire. Fell down. And you were sad. Marcus pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then he turned to Robert and said, "Get Sandra everything she needs to fix that aircraft. Whatever it costs. Whatever it takes. Tonight." He paused. "And call New York. Tell them I'll be there Monday. The deal waits." Robert nodded slowly. "And Robert," Marcus added quietly, "find out if that family needs anything. Would you have gotten on that plane? If someone had delayed your most important flight of the year, and then they found something wrong with the aircraft, what would you have felt in that moment?" Because what Marcus felt, standing there in the rain, was not relief. It was something far more complicated than that. In the days that followed, Marcus Hargrove could not stop thinking about one question, and it was not about the fuel line. The merger closed on the following Monday, exactly as Marcus said it would. Slightly delayed. Completely intact. The European partners, once they learned what had caused the postponement, a serious mechanical fault on the aircraft, were notably understanding. One of them, a silver-haired Swiss man named Dieter, said simply, "A good businessman knows when to trust the unexpected signal." Marcus had not forgotten that line. But the merger was not what occupied Marcus's thoughts in the week that followed October 14th. He kept coming back to Lily. He had instructed Robert to ensure that Dolores Simmons faced no disciplinary action for bringing her daughter to the airport that night. That had been his first call the morning after. His second call had been to Sandra in maintenance, to confirm the repair status of the aircraft and commission a full fleet audit of all Hargrove Company aircraft, something that, embarrassingly, had never been done with the thoroughness it deserved. But he had not yet spoken to Dolores again. He wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because he wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you" felt laughably insufficient. "You saved my life" felt dramatic in the daylight in a way it hadn't felt dramatic at all on that tarmac. He found himself looking up everything he could find about children and intuition. About the documented cases of toddlers and very young children who had somehow sensed danger before adults could. Researchers called it various things. Emotional attunement. heightened sensory processing. Some neurologists pointed to the fact that very young children, whose prefrontal cortexes are not yet fully developed, actually perceive and process fear and environmental signals in dramatically different ways than adults. They have not yet learned to rationalize away what they sense. They have not yet been taught that some things are impossible. Some things they simply feel. Marcus was not a superstitious man. He was not a religious man particularly, though he respected faith. He was a data man, a numbers man, proof man. Yet, he could not explain Lily Simmons. Not with data. Not with numbers. Not with anything in his considerable arsenal of rational frameworks. A week after that night, he asked Priya to arrange a quiet meeting. Not in his office. He sensed that would feel intimidating. He asked her to find out when Dolores Simmons's shift ended on Friday evening, and to arrange a private room in the staff section of the terminal. Comfortable. With food. Nothing formal. When Dolores arrived and found Marcus Hargrove sitting at a small round table with coffee and sandwiches laid out, she clearly had no idea what to expect. She sat down carefully, like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Am I in trouble?" she asked directly. She had, Marcus noted, the honest directness of someone who had been poor long enough to know that dancing around difficult things is a luxury. "No," he said simply. "You saved my life. I wanted to say thank you in person." Dolores looked at the table. Her jaw tightened the way people's jaws tighten when they are trying very hard not to cry in front of a stranger. "She's always been like that," Dolores said after a moment. "Lily. Since she could talk. She says things. She told me once, out of nowhere, that Grandma was going to be okay. And my mother had been sick for 2 years and we had no reason to believe that at all. And then, 3 days later, my mother had an unexpected turnaround and lived for another 14 months. Dolores shook her head. "I don't understand it. I don't try to understand it. I just try to listen." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You listen to her." "She's 3, Dolores said. "But yes, I listened to her." "I didn't," Marcus said. "Not at first. It took me a moment." "But you stopped," Dolores said quietly. "I stopped," he agreed. There was a pause between them, not uncomfortable, just full. The kind of pause that happens between two people who have shared something extraordinary and are still finding the words for it. Then Marcus leaned forward and said, "I'd like to do something. And I want you to be honest with me about whether it feels right or whether it feels like charity. Because I've been told I sometimes don't know the difference." Dolores looked up at him. "Lily is 3 years old," Marcus said. "Which means she is going to need school. Good school. And you are working nights at an airport to support both of you. Which means you probably don't have a lot of room in the budget for options." He paused. "I'd like to set up an education fund for Lily. Fully funded. Covers everything from pre-K through college, wherever she wants to go. No conditions. No strings. It's hers." The silence that followed was very long. Dolores pressed both hands flat on the table. Her eyes were bright. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because she ran onto a tarmac in a storm when she was 3 years old because something in her told her to," Marcus said. "And whatever that is, that thing inside her, I want to make sure the world gets to see it fully. I don't want it dimmed by circumstances. That's all. Do you believe some people carry a gift inside them that the world doesn't deserve to overlook? Because sitting at that small table in the staff wing of that airport, both of them did. The storm that almost took everything left behind something none of them expected. And it changed all 3 of their lives in ways nobody could have predicted. The education fund was established quietly, within 2 weeks. Marcus's legal team set it up as a private educational trust in Lily Simmons's name. No press. No announcement. Marcus had been specifically firm about that. This was not a publicity moment. This was a private human thing, and it deserved to stay that way. But life has a way of not staying small when something genuinely extraordinary has happened. The story found its way out. Not from Marcus, not from Dolores, but from a young member of the ground crew who had been on that tarmac on October 14th and who, 3 weeks later, mentioned it in passing to a friend, who mentioned it online. And within 48 hours the story had been picked up by local Charlotte news and then by 3 national outlets. Billionaire. A maid's 3-year-old daughter. Faulty fuel line. A stormy night. The internet, for once, did not pick it apart. It did not look for angles or inconsistencies or reasons to be cynical. Just felt it. Within a week, the story had been shared millions of times. Morning shows called. Magazines asked for interviews. A film producer reached out to Priya's inbox. Marcus declined every single media request, everyone, with a single polite statement released through his communications team that read, "Some moments belong to the people who lived them, not to the public. We are grateful and we are private. Please respect that." Dolores, for her part, gave one interview. Just one. A local Charlotte journalist who had grown up in her neighborhood, whose mother had known her mother. She sat down with him in a park near her apartment on a Sunday afternoon with Lily beside her, eating crackers, and she talked for 40 minutes about what it was like to be a single mother working nights, about what it felt like to look up and see Marcus Hargrove staring at her rain-soaked daughter on a tarmac, about the terror and the disbelief and the strange peace that came over her when she realized that somehow, impossibly, Lily had known. "People ask me how she knew," Dolores said near the end of that interview. "And I really can't tell you. I don't have a scientific answer. What I can tell you is that children, little children especially, they feel things that we've forgotten how to feel. We grow up and we build all these walls and we learn to ignore our instincts because the world tells us to be logical. But Lily hasn't built those walls yet. She still just feels. And she acted on it." She paused, looking at Lily, who was extremely focused on her crackers. "I think that's the lesson," Dolores said quietly. "Not that my daughter has some kind of magical gift. But that maybe all of us used to have it. And maybe we should try to remember." For Marcus, the month following October 14th was one of the strangest and most transformative of his life. He had always been a man who measured everything. His worth in net value. His success in deals closed. His relationships in their utility. He had not been unkind. He would have resisted that description strongly. But he had been, if he was being honest with himself, someone who had spent a very long time looking past the people who served him in order to focus on the things that seemed more important. Dolores Simmons cleaned his family's building every night for 3 years. He had never once noticed her. He would not have been able to pick her out of a lineup. And her daughter, the 3-year-old who had run through a storm to save his life, had never even been on his radar as a person who existed in his world. That realization sat with him in a way that no boardroom conversation, no financial loss, no professional failure ever had. He began changes at the Hargrove company that his board found initially puzzling. He commissioned a comprehensive review of employee compensation for all support and service staff. He established an internal education benefit program, fully funded tuition assistance for children of all Hargrove employees, building on what he had created privately for Lily. He started attending the monthly town halls that he had previously delegated to HR. He showed up. He listened. Not because it was good PR. The PR team didn't even know about most of it at first. Because somewhere on that tarmac in the rain, a child who could not yet read or write or tie her own shoes had looked at him and reminded him, without a single word of business strategy or moral philosophy, that the size of a human being has nothing to do with how much space they take up in the world. 6 months after that night, Marcus and Dolores crossed paths again at the terminal. He was flying out for a board meeting. She was starting her shift. They stopped in the corridor. Lily was not with her that evening. She was home with a new babysitter, one that Dolores could now afford. "How is she?" Marcus asked. "She starts pre-K in the fall," Dolores said, and the way her face changed when she said it, the way the exhaustion lifted for just a moment and something pure and proud and radiant came through. Marcus thought it might have been one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. "Good," he said. There was a pause. "She asks about you sometimes," Dolores added. "She calls you the man in the rain." Marcus smiled. It was a slow smile. "Real one." "The man in the rain," he repeated. "She said you looked scared," Dolores said. "She said you needed help." Marcus looked down the corridor for a moment, then back. "She wasn't wrong," he said quietly. "Some of the most important moments of your life will not announce themselves. They will arrive small, unexpected, soaking wet in a red dress, speaking in a voice that barely carries over the sound of the rain. And in those moments, the only question that matters is whether you are willing to stop. Whether you are willing to listen to the thing your rational mind is already trying to explain away. Whether you are willing to let someone you have been trained to overlook, someone smaller, younger, quieter, with less power and less money and less of everything the world says matters. Whether you are willing to let that person's truth reach you. Marcus Hargrove almost got on a plane that night. He almost let the meeting and the merger and the momentum of his own certainty carry him right past the moment that saved his life. He didn't. Not because he was wise, but because he was, for one small moment on a rainy tarmac, willing to be uncertain, willing to stop, willing to listen to a 3-year-old in a red dress who had no reason to be there except that something inside her would not let her stay away. And Dolores Simmons, a woman working nights in a building that bore the name of a family she served but never met, raised a daughter who still felt the things the rest of us have forgotten how to feel. That is the real story here. Not the fractured fuel line. Not the billion-dollar merger. Not even the education fund. The real story is that we are all connected, across every floor of every building, across every level of every system, in ways that wealth and power and position cannot see. And sometimes the person who saves you is the last person the world expects. Pay attention to the small voices around you. They may be the most important ones you ever hear. If this story moved you, if it made you feel even a fraction of what Marcus felt standing in that rain, please give this video a like. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. And if you are new here, please subscribe. This is what we do on this channel. We tell the stories that remind you why being human is the most extraordinary thing any of us gets to be. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the small moment in your life that changed everything? I want to read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who feels overlooked, someone who is tired, someone who just needs a reminder that small things matter, share this with them. Right now. It might be exactly what they need. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves. And I will see you in the next one.